What exactly would a Security Council seat for Africa produce? What would Africa really gain from a permanent UN Security Council seat? As the latest session of the United Nations General Assembly convenes in New York, a familiar refrain has emerged from several African leaders: the call for a permanent seat for Africa on the UN Security Council, alongside renewed appeals for debt relief. These demands have become recurring themes at not only UN meetings, but also at virtually every major international gathering where African leaders speak of marginalization, historical injustices, and underdevelopment. But these repeated calls now face growing scrutiny, not just from the international community, but increasingly from within the African diaspora and among politically conscious citizens across the continent. What will a Security Council seat really achieve? One question many observers have begun to ask, particularly within the African diaspora, is this: what exactly do African leaders hope to achieve with a permanent seat on the Security Council? After decades of lobbying, African countries were granted non-permanent seats on the Council, a symbolic victory for the continent. Yet for many, it remains unclear what tangible benefits these non-permanent memberships have yielded. Has Africa's global standing improved? Have regional conflicts abated? Has development accelerated? The evidence suggests otherwise. Is the UN structure the real problem? Many Africans agree that the UN in its current form is outdated and often ineffective. But the organization's limitations are systemic and not solely rooted in its lack of African representation. A permanent seat may grant Africa a louder voice, but it won't necessarily empower the continent to influence outcomes within a deeply flawed global governance system. More critically, observers point out a glaring contradiction. African leaders continue to struggle to strengthen their own regional institutions, such as the African Union and ECOWAS. If they cannot build effective united platforms on the continent, what meaningful impact can they have on a global platform like the UN Security Council? Leadership, not just representation, is the missing piece. Most Africans agree that the continent is underrepresented at the UN and other global institutions. However, many also believe that symbolic elevation will not compensate for the persistent failures of leadership across much of Africa. The inability to harness the continent's vast natural and human resources decades after colonial rule ended speaks volumes. Africa's most pressing challenges: poverty, external debt, dependency on foreign aid, political instability, are not problems that a Security Council seat will solve. In fact, many wonder if African leaders truly believe that gaining such a seat will somehow free Francophone countries from France's enduring control over their monetary and political affairs. An earned seat or a hollow symbol. Until African leaders begin to deliver competent, transparent, and visionary governance in their respective countries, and until they can strengthen regional bodies that represent continental interests with a united front, the quest for a permanent Security Council seat risks becoming nothing more than a hollow symbol. Others question whether African leaders truly need a seat at the UN Security Council to build the capacity for conflict resolution, something they have repeatedly failed to do through regional mechanisms. In many cases, persistent conflicts across the continent are being mediated and sometimes resolved not by African institutions, but by single foreign powers. This growing reliance on external actors raises a deeper concern. If Africa cannot unite to manage its own peace and security, what leverage would it truly bring to the world's highest decision-making body? A symbolic presence at the UN is not the same as real power or influence. Without foundational reforms at home, Africa's international ambitions may appear to be more about prestige than progress. What do you think? Would a permanent seat on the UN Security Council meaningfully change Africa's global image or position? Or is it time African leaders focused more on fixing internal governance and regional unity before chasing global recognition? Diaspoint values your voice. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, engage with others, and spread this conversation in your networks. Let's elevate the dialogue and drive meaningful change.